I'll tell you, man, for as little as this book is,
I know.
how
That's
dense.
the whole reason that I chose it. It was like, oh, it's only 150 pages. I can handle that.
Yeah, no way. I mean, yeah,
But,
okay. We're good. We're live. I checked my phone. All right. So
yeah, it was 150 pages, but every single sentence I was just found myself just kind of like stuck on and really thinking about every single one of them.
I guess just so many people just think that everything is so straightforward. They know what's going on in the world. And to then sit back and think of just this simple thing as race relations in the United States.
Well, I mean, obviously, you and I are at a disadvantage here. I've definitely found myself like, yeah, on every single sentence, I was just like thinking about it, like, with very fresh ears and mind, just, with the state of current affairs. And that was one thing I wanted to touch on was originally, if you remember, we were supposed to read Blood Meridian.
Right.
On this date. And, I had started reading that again, which is also a very dense book in a different way, obviously. But,
right.
Then I was reading and I was just like, man, with all this shit that's going on right now, because this was like right, as the George Floyd stuff was really happening, I was like, man, we should really not be talking about
No, and I'm glad you did.
Look,
I had watched the documentary, I'm Not Your Negro on Netflix. Did you watch that?
I did, yeah.
And I had watched that, and then you were like, hey, let's do this book. And I'm like, and I was the same way. I was almost finished with Blood Meridian, and I'm like, yeah, this book is good. And I didn't know anything about it. I'd never read Baldwin. I knew who he was, and then you said, it's a small book. We can do this.
Well, I had asked my friend Josh Jesslin, who was actually supposed to be here tonight with us to talk about this. I asked him what he would recommend of Baldwin's books, because I think I had read one of his books a long time ago, and I can't even remember which one, to be honest. But yes, I had watched that documentary, and I was like, every time I heard him talk, I was just like so struck.
Right.
By just the eloquence of his speaking, his voice, everything.
But he nails a truth.
Yeah.
It talks about it in his book.
Truths. Like every single thing he says is just like so like right on.
But we haven't heard it before.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I find really interesting is like, coming up in, very suburban schools and stuff, even in those schools, someone made us read the autobiography of Malcolm X, but I'd never heard of James Baldwin before, right. Which I find really interesting. And I think I have, a pretty good idea why actually reading this book, because in a way, a lot of his ideas are more revolutionary than Malcolm X's were.
And you empathize with them more. Oh, even though, I mean, he's talking about, he's getting into and saying, well, he preaches with love in the back of his heart. We'll talk about that too. Yeah. But he's really saying, I want to love you. Mm-hmm. I want our country to be successful. I want to do it through love. And like you said, that opens the door for you to say, okay, let me listen to what you're saying. Whereas, like he talks about Elijah Muhammad in this book, or these other people that says, you are white devils. We're going to do this without you. Right. Yeah. So the door opens with him.
Yeah. That was kind of an interesting thing too, is like the time period where this book was written is kind of like I'm not exactly sure the exact dates, but like, if you read Malcolm X's book, this is kind of early stages of his coming out in American society, because he's still very much like Black separationist in a way, whereas later on he kind of, became more open to embracing, and everything else once he got out of the Elijah Muhammad's shadow, so to speak. But
yeah, I learned a lot about him. Let's back up. All right, so we got Matt Meldon here. Matt is my cousin. Matt is pretty much my partner here on this thing, kind of, like I need a guy to go to Matt's the one that's always giving me books, or he's always willing to come up and help out and do an episode. So I always have one kind of, Matt's always in the wings of coming up and doing it, but he's pretty busy himself. So I'm lucky that he's here. I'm lucky that he picked this book. And
Yeah.
what are you doing? What are you doing on your own time? I know you're staying quarantined. Are you?
Yeah.
You guys are staying home. Are you doing music?
No, honestly, I haven't done any music stuff recently. I've been very much just in home mode, like gardening. Brittany, my girlfriend, just moved in, so we've been going nuts the last month, moving her in. Called up Junk King, hauled off truck worth of
our other cousin, right?
Yeah,
the
Jack
Junk King.
Thank you very much for the hookup there.
Nice, Jack. Thank you, Jack.
Yeah, but that's basically all I've been doing for as long as I can remember now. But not much music, unfortunately.
Nope.
But now that everything's kind of unpacked and organized, the wheels are starting to turn a little bit.
Get back into the swing of things.
Yeah.
So we talked about why you picked your book. We got that. I'm going to read the cover real quick.
Yeah.
A national bestseller when it first appeared in 1963, The Fire Next Time galvanized the nation and gave passionate voice to the emerging civil rights movement. At once a powerful evocation of James Baldwin's early life in Harlem and as a disturbing examination of the consequences of racial injustice. The Fire Next Time is an intensely personal and provocative document. It consists of 2 letters written on the occasion of the centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation that exhort Americans, both black and white, to attack the terrible legacy of racism. Described by the New York Times Book Review as a sermon, ultimatum, confession, deposition, testament, and chronicle, all presented in searing, brilliant prose. Baldwin's masterwork stands as a classic of our literature and as urgent today as when it was written. First thing,
I would argue even probably even more relevant to now. I'd say probably when it was written, it was way ahead of its time in many ways.
Yeah. I did a book not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago. Hedges, America, the Farewell Tour. And this wasn't going to be one of my first questions, but conversation topics. But yeah, I think it's more timely because Hedges talks about, hey, we are in the death throes of the Republic. And Baldwin talks about that often in his book and says pretty much, as Black America, we may not be able to do a lot. Power is probably never going to come in our hands, being, it was 8% then. I think it's 11, 12% now, maybe. But he says, but what we can do is if we want, we can bring this country down. Right? He says it many times.
Yeah. And that was towards the end of the book. He really starts delving into that. But yeah, it was so true. And yeah,
you don't want to listen to us. Guess what? And if we're not a part of it, if you're keeping us out, and like this was, however many years ago, 1963, and nothing has changed, people feel that, then maybe we'll bring it down and create something other. And that brings us to the title. What do you think the title, The Fire Next Time,
Well,
means?
you just laid it out there pretty much. It's, and it's, if you can't see the relevance of that title these days, I don't know where you're living at, but
right. But but when I read it the first time, as I don't know. I don't know if I'm just sometimes I'm just so dug in. The full quote is, God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water, the fire next time.
Yeah.
Pretty much saying, the flood, God says, all right, we're cool. I give you the rainbow sign. But if you keep acting up, I'm going to just eliminate you all.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so what we just talked about is that could be a threat from God, or it could be from the people themselves that just said, hey, if you're not going to do justice, not going to treat us right, then we're going to blow this thing up. But I think I was reading more into, because I went into, did you know that was the song by the Carver family?
No, I didn't.
So the Carver family, you all know, like the roots of Americana music. They had it in They said, as the song went on, I went and did my research. They said, "When the world's on fire, hide thy me." Okay, that was like the chorus. When the world's on fire, hide thy me. That came next. So you could take this as an ending statement, like, hey, if you don't do anything, yes, but when the world's on fire, hide thy me. I took it again. I think it's both. I think I like the one we just came up with, but the first book is a letter to his nephew, right? And so I kind of took it when I was first reading it and doing my research. I kind of took it as a letter to his nephew, as just saying, hey, I know what you're going through. You know, obviously that's what we're going to talk about here is his the first part of this. He is talking.
Yeah, this is like definitely one of the many things in this book where I found myself, you know, thinking like, well, how many white dudes do their dads or uncles sit down with them in their, you know, adolescent years, basically telling them, you know, how not to get lynched or how to not, you know, get your life ruined, just live a good life as a result of being born black or
we
being,
don't even, yeah, you don't even need to worry. Yeah, something that we can't even fathom that every black family has the conversation about.
Yeah.
Barack Obama talks about having to have that, you know, conversation with his kids, you know, that grew up in the White House,
right?
Saying you're going to be treated different, you know, and then the fact that he gets into then in this book, the fact that most America doesn't see it.
Yeah.
That we
and it's something that they don't even think about.
Don't think about, and don't.
And that's one of the questions that you asked us in the prep of this. Is like, what is the crime, the greatest crime committed?
Right. The crime, and I'll read that. So he talks about the crime that's committed. He says, "I know which is much worse, that this is the crime of which I accuse my country and my countrymen, and for which neither I nor time nor history will ever forgive them, that they have destroyed and are destroying hundreds of thousands of lives and do not know it and do not want to know it."
Yeah.
It nails it. I write it nails it probably 5 or 6 times in this book. Yeah. He nails it, and it does. And I've had this conversation in other episodes with, you know, with friends and family, and I think you're friends with a lot more open-minded liberal people, and I love my friends and family, but you know, they do not want to see the truth of what exists in America today for the black population. Want to ignore it 100%. And he says it right now. That's the crime. But also, he handles it different. How does he look at these people?
Yeah.
How, you know, Baldwin says, "I'm going to love you. I pity you," because he still thinks that's the innocence of America.
Yeah. Yeah, and he often talks in the book about, you know, his white liberal friends, right? And you know, he says he knows not a lot, but many that he feel would die for him, you know, and are truly trusts with his life and everything. But yeah,
he says defending my few white liberal friends is, he says, I can feel like a white liberal defending a black person's humanity at their things.
Right.
He says, I feel like to say, hey, if you only knew this black girl Mary, you know, I know you don't know many black people, but she's a really good person, right. You know, and no white people are really going to listen to it. Like, oh, that's your one story of your one example. Baldwin comes out and says, yeah, I feel like I'm doing the same thing, because he said, I have a few white liberal friends that actually give a shit.
Yeah.
And would give me the shirt off their back. But that doesn't matter. If I have a few exceptions in court, the whole race is guilty.
Yeah.
Because that they are the exception. The whole the power structure, the institutionalized racism is really guilty. And if you got a few good eggs or whatever that are working for you, it doesn't do much. It doesn't say much.
Yep.
Which actually comes to my next question. We're two white guys talking about black issues.
Yes.
What would Baldwin think of that?
Well, you know, that was one thing that, you know, as we got as I got more and more into this book, I was like, man, I really wish I would have asked one of my Black friends to be here with us to discuss this, but because I think it would put obviously a whole nother spin on it that you and I might not have, thought of doing, obviously, but.
Right. We'll play devil's advocate. Same thing. I have plenty of Black friends, and I'm like, oh, should I call them and get them on here, read the book, and let's discuss this. And I didn't do that. And part of the reason was, and I'll tell you that in a minute, but the part of his argument, I think he goes both ways in this book. And the one side, I think he says to be against it is that, where is it, page 58? He kind of says something about his liberal friends. And when we're discussing this, as you and I are doing, he said liberals' attitudes have, with their perceptions or their lives or even their knowledge, revealed, in fact, that they could deal with the Negro as a symbol or a victim, but had no sense of him as a man.
Yeah.
And I hate to say, it, but these conversations you have, it's almost like, when we're not in the middle of it, and my best buddies are not Black. I have a lot of good friends that are Black, but I'm not talking to them every day. We're able to almost create this conversation as a symbol of people of America or as a victim. And it's easy for us to have that conversation, just like James Baldwin said.
Yeah. I mean, that's been kind of my stance on a lot of this stuff, is like, I don't have anything to say right now about much other than just to sit back and listen, keep my mouth shut, listen to the realities of our Black colleagues in this country.
Yeah, like a lot of people said, it's time for us to sit back, listen, and kind of let them take control. Now, here's where my other side comes in, because he argues against that too. The real problem in this country is us, and nothing's going to change until we change. And we don't need their Black leadership for us to change. Yeah. And he mentions that too. And I think that he's dead on there. Well, he just talks about us growing up. He says, again, it cannot be denied at this point of view is abundantly justified in American Negro history, just about all the things that they go through, to have stood so long hat in hand. We're waiting for Americans to grow up and realize that we do not threaten them. Okay. So what he's saying too is that we're 90% of the population, white America. Nothing is going to change until we make critical, vast changes. And that does come with us. So the flip side of that coin is yeah, we're two white dudes talking on a lot of things that maybe for the first time in a long time in history that we should sit back and shut up and just listen. I 100% agree with that as far as social movements and this and things go. But maybe there is another conversation there. Maybe the other conversation is we need to get these people, these innocent people that don't realize, innocent people, that's the part we get into more, that don't realize the horror that we're creating in this country, the inequality, and maybe we can round them up, and we do lead that movement in that march to say we got to change for the betterment, because 8% of the population or 11% or whatever the heck it is isn't going to do that.
Yeah. And well, it seems to always make a big difference come election time. But yeah, pray that it goes our way this time, because if not, oh man.
Truth. No, you're right. I posted something today. I think it was Ice Cube, and Ice Cube just said, Biden's up there, but he's still not talking for us. You know what I mean? We want to get rid of Trump, but what's he really saying for us this time? They need our vote, like you said. We're way more important this time, but there's not even a mention of what you're going to do to change my life.
Yeah.
What's it going to take?
Well, hopefully he gets together for the debates, because as of right now, I'm like, all he does is keep reaching out to ask me for more money. And I'm like, I already gave you my $27 as a little FU from a Bernie bro or whatever I am. But
right,
that's $27 until I start
you gotta make that last till you win this time. But you got to start speaking on things that matter to us.
Yeah,
it matters too.
Like just beating Trump isn't enough. It's not going to be enough, sadly. I mean, even though it should be, but.
Well, yeah, not to go on a tangent here, but you're right. And a lot of purely just Biden, just Democrats are laying back, just saying, we got to beat Trump. And we all agree with that. I get that. But your lives may not be affected as other lives with a Biden that goes in and maintains a status quo and just doesn't ruin the country like Trump does, or ruin our relationships with the world, or ruin the environment. We get all that. But some people feel the repercussions more than others.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're ignoring that, that's not fair. It's not an ultimately better choice all around. And so we got to talk about that right now. And a lot of people just say, shut up, just let Biden win. Well, that happened the last time around.
Yeah, that didn't work out so great.
It didn't work out. I was a Bernie backer. I'm backing Biden, but online and in these social groups, I see the angst and the frustration still happening there, and it scares me to death because they're not being listened to still, and they might not go out and vote. And that is, wow. If we do a repeat and we put him back in office because of this, I mean, it'll be our fault again. Or I can't say our fault, but it'll be the left's fault again, because you're still not listening to a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that's the problem right now, is that Biden's really just not saying the right things. But I mean, my hope is that he just doesn't want to, start too early. Hopefully they get it together in a month or two beforehand, but hopefully
I hope so. I hope him and Harris, they pull this all together and they start putting out messages that really unify the left. And then they could. And we're all hoping for the best here. We're all hoping for the best. And there's just some people that just don't want to be ignored, and I don't blame them. I don't think they should be.
I mean, that was what lost it last time, 100%. So
Hillary.
But back to the book here, I guess we kind of trailed off.
Happened. Yep.
One of the things there, in the book too, another thing that I found very interesting is he really kind of starts talking about kind of the turning point in like adolescent Black kids' lives. Coming up, well, what was your take on that? What did you think that was all about?
Well, at that point he was saying, there's not a lot of opportunity here. And the honest to goodness truth, he says your opportunity pretty much is the reality on the street at that point in time for him. And I don't see it as a lot different today.
No, not at all.
Maybe a little bit, but the opportunity was either vice, which is you're going to be a racketeer, you're going to work on the street one way or another, selling drugs. This is reality. How do you survive and make through yourself? Or it's through the church, right? And that
or there's one other one that he used the term gimmick.
Oh, or the gimmick, right?
Yeah, he said, or what was? Let's see if I can find that.
I had the gimmick, page 24, but that's different from you. Did you find it?
Not yet here. Well, I'll come back to it.
He says, every Negro boy, excuse my language, first of all, I'm just reading straight from the text. In my situation during those years, we forgot to give our caveat at the beginning. During those years, at least, who reaches this point realizes at once profoundly, because he wants to live, that he stands in great peril and must find with speed a thing, quote unquote, a gimmick, to lift him out, to start him on his way. And it does not matter what the gimmick is. It was this last realization that terrified me. And since it revealed that the door opened on so many dangers, helped to hurl me into the church. And by an unforeseeable paradox, it was my career in the church that turned out precisely to be my gimmick.
Yeah. And that kind of is very telling of him as a writer, I would say, because I'm not actually sure what, education he received outside of, elementary through high school. I didn't do my homework to find out. But I'm assuming he didn't go to college.
No.
I think that his speaking, amazing speaking abilities come from his duties in the church as a preacher, which,
right.
Yeah.
He was successful at. He was very successful at that. Yeah. He just had a natural talent.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
but he had a gimmick, and today those gimmicks, like I think that if you were to modernize it, black youth, inner city youth knows what those gimmicks are. Those gimmicks are sports. Those gimmicks are rap industry, music industry, right? Yeah. You're not going to make it. We don't allow it for you to make it the straight way. You're not going to get a job from, that we take for granted. You're not going to know a person that gets you into, and again, this isn't strict 100%, but a lot of times you're growing up in Harlem or these areas, you're not going to know somebody that can get you a job here or there, or go to college and do this. This is not the way. You are kept out for a reason.
And his father was a preacher as well, which that obviously, and he kind of talks about that a good amount, is like this kind of stress, friction between him and his father that was always kind of there.
And he competed.
Probably for obvious reasons that, one other thing that we haven't even talked about yet, and it's not discussed in the book, obviously, at all. I
was looking for those. Actually, I know what you're saying. I'm looking for that in the book. Were you looking for it in the book too?
No, I mean, I didn't expect it to be there because I don't even honestly know if he ever even admitted during his lifetime.
I don't know if he did either, but you're looking for that little like hints in the book. And there's a couple times where I could maybe see it, and I wrote it, about his sexuality.
Well, he speaks a lot about white men's, inferiority,
he talked about white men scared of the sexuality of the black man.
Yeah. Pretty
much. And in a couple occasions, he talked about how the white men just had to bring it up. Yeah. Like had to, say like, hey, this is how you are, but shrug it off. And then they didn't want to ever, and then a lot of times they just didn't want to act like they were sexual at all.
But it's definitely like early in the book, it's a very, he's always talking about his father and like kind of this competition that he felt. And then once it became obvious that he was extremely talented at speaking, that his father was probably, intimidated by him. Right. And then he kind of seemed, and that was kind of the interesting little dynamic there between those two characters is, I'm guessing more than likely his father had a inkling that his son wasn't like all the other boys in the neighborhood in some ways. So
yeah, no, but then in the beginning of the book, in the first book, where he's with the letter to his nephew, doesn't he say something like, "My dad hated life"? Yeah, my dad believed what the white man said about him. Mm-hmm. Was he talking about him, or was he talking about his grandfather, his dad? No, he said, your grandfather. So he's talking about his nephew. He says, I don't know, but certainly both of you and your father resemble him very physically. Well, he is dead. He never saw you, and he had a terrible life. He was defeated long before he died because at the bottom of his heart, he really believed what white people said about him. This is one of the reasons he became so holy. I'm sure that your father has told you something about that. Neither you nor your father exhibit any tendency towards his holiness. You really are from another era, part of what happens when the black man left the land and came into what late E. Franklin Frazier calls the city of destruction. You can only be destroyed by believing that you really are what the white world calls an N-word. I tell you this because I love you, and please don't ever forget it. So he was saying, my dad fled to the church. He lived a horrible life because he accepted what was told about him. And in James 1, his sexuality, like you said, was probably something that his father saw, and they probably didn't. James doesn't discuss it, but it probably was an issue there. And then 2, obviously, James saw his dad as almost a victim.
Yeah, and that was, as he's discussing his upbringing, and one quote that really stuck out for me was talking about like the relationships with his parents and with elders and people in his community, and he says he must be good not only to please his parents and not only to avoid being punished by them. Behind their authority stands another, nameless and impersonal, infinitely harder to please, and bottomlessly cruel. And this filters into the child's consciousness through his parents' tone of voice as he is being exhorted, punished, or loved. In the sudden, uncontrollable note of fear heard in his mother or his father's voice, when he is strayed beyond some particular boundary, he does not know what the boundary is and can get no explanation of it, which is frightening enough. So he's kind of like talking.
That's the talk that you talked about before.
Yeah.
Black America has to have with their kids that white America doesn't even
really
know.
Touching and horribly sad. It's like he's basically saying like the parents aren't really telling him what they're afraid of, but what they're trying to straighten their kid out to basically not expect what every white kid can get out of his life. You know, it's like anytime they see one of their kids you know, straying off of the path that's been laid for you as a Black American, you know, the parents kind of like even subconsciously kind of like try and, you know, either scold them or like, you know, push them towards, you know, not reaching so high.
Right. And before it could lead to lynching, you know, hey, you are not going to get treated the same if you treat a white woman this way or whatever. They're going to come out to get you. And now today it's, you know, you hate to say it, but it's the cops, right? You are not going to get treated the same way. You could lose your life in things that normally people wouldn't lose their life for.
Yeah. And that was the
warning that you don't want to have to give, but
get back to like him becoming a writer. He does at one point talk about one of his teachers. I don't know if it was in high school or something, where he had like, you know, a gift and it was there. People could see it, but the teacher kind of pulled him aside and was like, "Oh, you should look into," I forget, was it carpentry or, you know, just a trade. Basically, it was like, "Oh, you'll never make it as a writer, obviously," and you know.
Because that is what he talked about. We're being held up. We're being held back in every which way, and so the only opportunities are the ones that we talked about before. And he sees that in front of him, and we got to open up that. And that's not something that Black America can do because they don't have the power. That is something that white America has to, one, acknowledge, can't be innocent or ignorant of it, and two, then say, I want to make that change. And that, but going back to your point about that conversation, I think there was something that was interesting too. As they're getting explained this by their parents, James also said that this is something that a person growing up Black was learning in America. It's not something that's just they're born with knowing why they're hated or that they're hated. But he said a Black person just cannot believe that white people are treating him as they do. He does not know what he has done to merit it. And when he realizes that the treatment according him has nothing to do with anything he has done, that the attempt of white people to destroy him for what it is, for that is what it is utterly gratuitous. It is not hard for him to think of white people as devils. So once he learns that, hey, you know, my parents have warned me about this, and now I'm seeing it firsthand, and so now I'm saying it's nothing that I've done, but they just treat me this way for the heck of it. Then you're going to have hate starting to build.
Yeah, and this is kind of like where it makes a lot of sense that obviously he gravitates towards the church, you know, as a way of, you know, having that outlet to express his abilities, his natural God-given abilities.
But why did he turn from the church? What was it? Because he finally says, I'm out of here, and he doesn't go for it. What was it that turned him away?
Well, he does talk a lot about how in the Black Christian church, at least at the time, he was, you know, saying that all of the ground rules are basically written by whites, and that God with
white religion. Right. And he offsets that with his meeting and discussion at dinner with the Elijah Muhammad, where he says, That's Christianity is a white God. We were taught this by being slaves. We were pushed upon this, and now we have a black God under the Muslim religion.
Yeah.
But he was a preacher in the Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
and he finally sees it for what it is. After a while, he says, "I learned all the dirty tricks.
Yeah.
I could squeeze I learned how to squeeze every last dime out of the poorest person in that room."
Mm-hmm.
And it disgusted him.
Yeah, it's a racket, like all of the pimps and dealers on the street in Harlem that he talks so often about.
Exactly.
And
He
that was
realized he
interesting.
was in the same racket.
Yeah, exactly.
But
And that was kind of like then it kind of transitions from there very smoothly into, as you said before, his discussions with Elijah Muhammad of the Nation of Islam. And he discusses like what it is about the Nation of Islam that obviously is so attractive to people, black people at the time, which makes a lot of sense.
oh yeah, I think, man, I'll tell you, yeah. If I was in a lot of their shoes, I probably would have listened to the guy. I mean, really listened to the guy, because you're reading the book and you're just being put in the position, and to empathize. He's saying all the right things to me. If I'm a late teens, early 20s type of guy, I don't know. I look at myself as maybe following him.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I mean, it gives you, I think, all the things that are missing from what the Christian, religion was offering at the time, which is, a sense of dignity as a black person, pride in being black, and not just like a lot of the message of Christianity is like, well, don't expect things to be good here on earth, because it's not going to be ever.
You're meant to suffer.
You're meant to suffer through this. But
and Ham, he talks about the guy Ham that was cursed was black, and so Christianity right from the beginning is saying,
you're screwed.
Under our religion, you're cursed anyways.
Yeah.
Right off the bat. So, and our God is white. I mean, that's pretty much what they were taught too.
Mm-hmm.
The God is white here. So Elijah's like trying to say, why would you follow this? And the hypocrisy. The biggest thing too is then James gets into the hypocrisy of the church that has no real moral backing in what they've done. He says, what showed me the biggest thing about the Christian church and the hypocrisy was the Holocaust. And we all say, wow, we could not imagine that happening. But guess what? Those Christians that say they're Christians let it happen. Mm-hmm. And he said, you think that wouldn't happen to Black Americans? Do you really think that if they started to systematically do this, that all these Christians would stand up and stop it?
Mm.
No.
Pretty scary.
Yeah, it's very scary. But I think Elijah too, I think you respect Elijah because Elijah, we talked about this before, stumped him when Elijah said, white people are the devil, overall, look what they've done to us. And then Elijah gave that example I told you of his white friend Mary. Well, I wanted to talk about Mary.
Yeah.
One girl that I could say, hey, is an exception to the rule. And Elijah would pretty much say, yeah, there are exceptions. But if this were a court, they'd all be guilty.
Yeah.
And I think he was stumped by that.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very interesting meeting on many levels. It's like, first of all, just trying to imagine James Baldwin in a room with him and Elijah. He really paints him, I mean, for lack of a better word, as a cult leader in a way. Yeah. Very culty, where he describes how he's talking, and it's like every single thing that he says, he basically bounces off of every one of his followers.
He doesn't ask a direct question.
Right?
He asks a question about you to him.
Yeah, he'll like bounce the question off. What do you think that he should do?
And then everything he says, everybody's giving an amen back and forth. He's like, everything that Elijah said, it would just be like people be supporting it, yelling stuff down the
I mean, it was basically all just like,
table.
Kind of
That's
an
the way he walked in.
To see how useful James could be for them, and they kind of, it seemed like he was just waiting for Baldwin to basically kiss the ring, so to speak. But obviously that didn't happen.
And I think that's why you like James. I mean, even though I can see Elijah's points on a lot of things he said, James, I think that's why he's so beloved. Is he believed in love? I mean, how many times in this book did he say? I mean, he was truly the true Christian, right? I think that's why he wanted to be a Christian. He wanted it to be there. He
and
saw
also,
the hypocrisy, but he really believed in it.
Yeah, and absolutely, and also that's, again, not to beat a dead horse, but it's he's kind of like the ultimate outsider. Not only is he Black, he's also homosexual, which is like that's pushes him into a whole new world of
right.
what he's up against. I mean, it's like that's why he feels so relevant today, because it's not just about Blacks. That's been going on forever. It's about gay people, and it's he's fighting on both all directions.
And to be an optimist with that is what
exactly
makes him such an enduring guy. And you just want to fight with him, because you're like, wow.
Obviously Elijah Muhammad isn't aware of what's really going on, or I don't think he would be at the table trying to.
And I think, I didn't know that about Elijah Muhammad, that he watched his father get lynched in front of his eyes, so I'm not judging that man either. Holy smokes. You watch your dad get lynched and die like that, you're going to have some pretty, some different views. But James comes from, somewhere else. He's had a lot of different experiences. Like you said, he's probably feeling hatred, not or discrimination, not just his white-black world, but within his world, because he's gay. But to remain
in himself too, it's like, he can't even be open about who he is. And
right, and to me, optimistic, and to really just keep saying that the answer is just love. And hey, white America, we can either bring you down, because we're not going to have the power, or you got to choose to make a change. You've got to choose it. You've got to see that you're not innocent. You got to come to grips with your history. Same thing Chris Hedges says in America the Foul World Tour. If we don't come to grips with what we've done and who we are, because we do not, I've had conversations with people, talking about the Native Americans. Oh, that old thing. It was a genocide. We stole land from millions of people, and we tried to kill them off. This isn't something you just skip over. We have to come to terms to know what we really did. And that, speaking of Blood Meridian, right?
Yeah.
That was a book Matt and I were going to do last time, where they were trying to kill off Native Americans. They would pay you $100 a scalp. Is that what it was? There's 1,000. It wasn't 1,000, was it?
No, that would have been a little even much for back then, I think. But
yeah, that would have been a lot. But that was the book Matt and I were going to do. It's based on a true story. This is what part of that genocide was. But until we see what we are, admit to it, and then say we want to make changes, it's not going to make changes. And he was still optimistic with that. Are you optimistic with that, Matt? I don't know why I laughed. That's freaking horrible. That was an evil laugh. But are you optimistic?
Remains to be seen.
We know too much.
Yeah.
You know too much. We know, we know too much. That the closest people to me and friends and family, this isn't something you can even have a serious conversation about, because to them, they are innocent. It's silly.
Or they just don't want to talk about it. They won't even have the conversation, because
no, they won't have the conversation for a couple reasons. Number one, it's like snowflake liberal. White guilt. Oh God,
that was another thing I wanted to say before, is that Baldwin definitely does not. This book isn't all just about everything's the white man's fault. It's like he's very critical of of Blacks as well,
and the church, and the major following of the church, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason why everybody should read this book. And again, I say this a lot of times when I read a book. There's no way this book, and we've said it a couple times, is, look at that. and
Yeah.
yet it is so dense. We have not covered a tenth of what we can talk about in this little book. So please go out and read it, because I mean, I have most pages when I go and do prep. I usually do 2 pages in my book, and I have 4 with page numbers of things that we could talk about. And then I'm looking at them right now, and I don't want to bring them up because they're each 20-minute conversations. I mean, it's unreal. The one thing I wanted to say though, did you read Ta-Nehisi Coates' book Between the World
I
and Me?
haven't, and I've heard him speak on the radio in interviews and stuff, and yeah, I feel like that he definitely is a logical next step for me to.
Yeah, I'll tell you, you know, and I didn't realize how much they're like this, but obviously Between the World and Me is Ta-Nehisi's Coates' it's his modern day this, because I'm reading this and I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. Ta-Nehisi's book is a letter to his son. You knew that. So it pretty much, he gets it from, he had to have got it from this. So it's a letter to his son about modern day America, police shootings, and the same thing about, mainly about the conversation that he has to have with his son that shouldn't even have to exist. The life is different for him.
Yeah.
But then also in the second book of this book, he comes up, and I read it, is where James Baldwin talks about the void, the, you know, actually says Between the World and Me, where Ta-Nehisi must have gotten, you know, his ideas for his book. So another book, I have my sociology class at school read that book. We got class copies, and I'll tell you, this one's got to be first, because I didn't even know this one, and they matched up. It definitely is the next step for anybody out there. Definitely read that. It's just it's a modern day version of this book. Brings you up to date.
I'll have to definitely check that out.
And powerful. I mean, that was, to me, before I read this book, it was the most powerful book. And James talks about that. Again, I could go on and on, but James talks about that, and I wanted to say that. You feel silly, Matt, don't you, when you're reading this and you don't know it already? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You feel ignorant. You feel like, wait a minute, you know, why don't I know it? But James even mentioned it, but this was a long time ago too. But James just says that, you know, there is no voice out there for this. There's a voice out there for everything else, but to tell my story, there is nothing like pretty much what I'm writing here. And the sad part is since 1963, there are probably a few more. Here it is. He calls it the privacy of this experience. There are probably a few more, but they're not, you know, as a white man, I wish they were in my face. They're not there. They probably should be. For all the horrors of American Negro's life, there's been almost no language. That's pretty much the privacy of his experience, which is only beginning to be recognized in language, and which is denied or ignored in official and popular speech. Hence, the Negro idiom lends credibility to any system that pretends to clarify it. And in fact, the truth about the black man as a historical entity and as a human being has been hidden from him deliberately and cruelly. The power of the white world is threatened whenever the black man refuses to accept the white world's definitions. So essentially, you know, I felt so dumb and ignorant a lot when I read these things. But then again, one, that's the way it is, and two, it's one, because it's meant to be that way. But two, it's because that's the way it is, right? Yeah. I mean, it was the way he just for the fact that he said that made me feel a little bit better. Like it's not there, and even though I'm trying to know it and learn it.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing too. Is like at one point in the book, I can't remember where it was, but he talks about Robert Kennedy. He's like, oh, he's predicting that there'll be the black president in 40 years, and it's like. I was like adding the numbers. I was like, whoa, that's pretty interesting.
Dead on.
And right, dead on. And then, but
And you and I get, before you go on, I know what you're going to say. Before you go on, when you hear Robert Kennedy say that, as a white guy, you and me, I was kind of like, cool. You know, at first,
Yeah.
I accept him as that, like, all right, you're a little woke, right? 1960. But Baldwin doesn't give him that,
No.
which is good.
It says, and this is one of the points too that really struck me. It was like, said it is entirely unacceptable that I should have no voice in the political affairs of my own country, for I am not a ward of America. I am one of the first Americans to arrive on these shores, which that was something, it's so obvious, and yet it never really clicked to me, is that, yeah, I mean, every single Black person in this country has been here hundreds of years longer than my descendants were. And yet they're still struggling just to even be equal.
And it's okay if it takes another 40 years.
Right.
I mean, and like I said, that's how like ignorant I feel, because you hear that at first. And the funny thing is I read it in the book, I forgot about it, and then I watched the documentary, and it's featured in that documentary. And I heard it again, and I'm like, all right, Kennedy, you're woke. Okay, good for you. And then James says, hell no. Wait a minute. My family's been here 100 or 200 more years than your Kennedy family has. And you're going to tell me I'm not ready for the presidency yet? 40 more years? Yeah. Bullshit. Right. I'm not accepted yet. Wait, so why do I have to be accepted by white culture? And that's a whole other thing he gets to in the book, is that for some reason white people think that for somehow their acceptance has to be a part of Black culture or Black.
He kind of says that. He says, I don't want acceptance, I want power.
Right. Like I don't need your acceptance. Who says you have to accept me? You know, and I hate to say it, but I was just hanging out with my buddies not too long ago, friends, and you know, they always go back to, well, we elected Barack Obama president, and it's like, a favor? You know, what do you mean? So now everything is done and over with, but that is.
Yeah. And what really changed? Obviously, not a lot.
Wow. But that is a common perception, is that proved that we're not racist. I actually saw a message, fraternity brothers and I were on today, and a message board, and one of my fraternities wrote that we are the least racist country on earth. he wrote that today. I ignored it because just, you're not going to get through to somebody like that. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. What do you want to say to wrap it up? What was the point that we missed? We got a couple. Anything that you wanted to go over that we didn't get to? God, you know, let me just say, I've watched, for my prep, I've watched YouTube videos. I Googled this and watched a lot of people go over this book, and I was really nervous trying to attack it. And I'll tell you, nobody does a good job. I think we did a decent job because we've hit a lot, but I'll tell you, I've watched probably 10 to 12 videos, and they skip. It's almost like frustrating because they gloss over so much, but I gotta say, I'm doing it. I'm trying. It's hard to do. But what is something, I mean, that stands out that really just has to be said before
I think this one that I highlighted here really seemed poignant for our times. It says, if we, who can scarcely be considered a white nation, and he's speaking of the United States, persist in thinking of ourselves as one, we condemn ourselves with the truly white nations to sterility and decay. Whereas if we could accept ourselves as we are, we might bring new life to the Western achievements and transform them. The price of this transformation is the unconditional freedom of the Negro. He, the Negro, is the key figure in this country, and the American future is precisely as bright or as dark as his. Which,
we lie to ourselves, but what we can't see ourselves, other nations see it so much clearer than we do.
Yeah,
what's holding us back?
Well, and I think that, you know, obviously he's talking about Black Americans, but I think that one thing that has changed slightly since Baldwin's time is that now there's become like almost a new class of like lower class white people who are now being pushed lower and lower as well. And that really is kind of, I think, what is causing so much strife right now in our society, is that they're obviously purposely being, not educated and
pushed to the edges. And if they were to unite, if they were to work together,
and they should be.
Well, that's
because now it's not so much, it's all, as with everything, it's just about who's got the money and who's got the power. And that's why there's so much animosity with, it seems like, all of these people, the scary Trump people that you see on the news, just openly spewing hate speech and everything else. It's like, well, what caused them in this day and age? And
it's economic. It's economic, a lot of it.
Yeah,
but we've kept, like James says, loss of opportunities. We're not giving Black population opportunities. So economics has been the issue for them for so long. But like you said, now with the big wealth distribution issue, a lot more white people are getting pushed down there. And Chris Hedges, I keep going back to the book America the Farewell Tour, but Chris Hedges says, he even talks about, he says, before we deal with the race issue, which needs to be dealt with, he says, we're going to crumble. But he says the economic issue has to be dealt with first. And that will get Black America and poor white America at least into a point where they, are working together, fighting for justices and equality as far as economically goes. And then it'll be easier to fix the racial problems. And at first I didn't, I don't know if
I don't see that. I don't see the beginnings of that unification happening just
because the upper elite knows to separate, divide and conquer.
Yeah.
That's why I think we're at our most racist point in history. It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that there's more hate groups around now. And of course it's, Trump has a lot to do with it. But the coincidence is that there's more, we're in an economic failure right now. And so when you're at an economic failure, the establishment is going to divide and conquer. They're going to make you hate your neighbor that isn't, even though they're going through the same issue as you, and you guys could fight and form unions and push back on the upper crust and demand better wages and this and that. But they're going to push you two apart and hate each other on race reasons, so you don't work together and get economic freedom and economic prosperity.
Yeah,
it's not a coincidence.
That's one of the most obvious, red flags there. It's like, okay, where's the stock market at right now?
Right.
With this many people out of work, it's like the stock market is almost back to where it was, already inflated.
Well, I read something the other day. The people that are really it's a top like 15%. I mean, that's it. I mean, it might even be less than that. Like 12% of the country is actually truly invested where it's making a big difference.
Yeah.
All right, I want to end with this quote, which is a positive note. If we, and now I mean the relatively conscious whites and the relatively conscious blacks, who must, like lovers, insist on or create the consciousness of the others, do not falter in our duty now, we may be able, handful that we are, to end the racial nightmare and achieve our country and change the history of the world. If we do not now dare everything, the fulfillment of that prophecy, recreated from the Bible in a song by a slave, is upon us. God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water, the fire next time. So he's saying there are few of us, but if we can do it, we can make the changes.
Yeah.
We can do some real good.
It's obvious what needs to be done. It's like, that's what's so maddening right now. It's like, obviously we have so many things that need to be addressed. We've got, the environment, which is just freaking fire tornadoes raging in California, literal fire tornadoes. I was like, what's happening?
Well, and in this book too, he saw it as the end of the world. It wasn't climate change, but nuclear proliferation was the fear in there. He pretty much was saying, this is a peak of our existence, is now to be able to destroy each other. We're on the edge of it. And so we're still there, obviously, but now we have a even, I don't know, how would you even compare those threats? We're done.
That seems like that would be kind of relaxing. Just go back to the old Cold War compared to what we're dealing with right now. For my
another topic, and I don't want to go off into it, but the whole thing where the Cold War and how it made us make adjustments for civil rights, that pretty much if we didn't have to prove ourselves to the world, civil rights probably would have never occurred. Get that movement. We were just having to show that, hey, if we're really on the right side of things as far as Russia, the Soviet Union goes, then we better show that we have some freedoms for real.
Somebody's hungry there, it sounds like.
Yeah, he's yelping. I don't know. All right, brother. Thank you. This was a good one. We went over time.
Yeah,
but
another one.
Pick another book, and then I'll be in touch. And we'll get together soon. But this was a good talk.
I gotta keep reading.
All right, brother. Thanks, Matt.
All right. Thanks.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.